Sure. Welcome, everybody. I'm really glad you're here. Here is the Environmental Justice Practitioners Network, where our purpose is to help Unitarian Universalists deepen their knowledge and their practice of collaboration with frontline community members in accountable ways, especially where it helps Unitarian Universalists who are passionate and working on climate and environmental justice to be in good relation and in good collaboration. And so we've been doing once a month events for a couple of years now, and it's thrilling to have Elandria Williams with us. I won't spend much more time saying anything other than to say, Elandria, we've hoped to have on this event for more than a year now because of the kind of work Elandria has done, from the Highlander Research and Education Center to being co-editor of Beautiful Solutions, which I hope, Elandria, you'll talk about tonight, and also a trainer with a PeoplesHub. And Elandria, maybe you'll say something more about that for us as well. I believe it's going to be a powerful resource for all of us who care about this work of intersectional justice. And the other piece that we're also aware of is that you've taken on being a co-moderator of the Unitarian Universalist Association for us, for which we are so grateful. So with no further ado, Elandria, I would just say, please tell us what you would like us to hear right now about Beautiful Solutions or doing the work intersectionally. Please bring us into the present with what you're doing.
Yeah, so first I'll say hi. It's such a beautiful thing to be here. I normally live in Tennessee. Right now I am traveling to Kenosha, Wisconsin, with some friends, Eric David Carlson, son Miles, and a friend of mine, Kimberly Jomjack, as some of you know. And the other thing I'll just say, because it'll come up, is that I was just in Barcelona for 10 days with a global working group around Beyond Development, connected to the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. I'm the North American representative, and a group of people from the Niger Delta to the Philippines to Vietnam to Brazil, India. There's 25 of us. Thinking around what it means to move beyond development. And this year our focus was urban commons, and how that connects to rural urban, what it means, and for me to include in reparations and restoration, and to really think about what urban commoning means. And so that's in my head. And then I leave actually in 2 days for Korea with the U.S. Labor Against the War. And so there's a lot of things floating in my brain, and super happy to be here. And this is the first time we've had moderators that work. And so some of you know I wasn't at the board meeting, partly because I needed to be in Barcelona. And so we're reimagining what leadership looks like in all levels. And so if I talk too fast, it's okay to say slow down, because I talk too fast. And so please come off mute and go slow down. And I'll be like, okay. So Beautiful Solutions. So I used to work at the Highlander Center. I'm not there anymore. I'm now the training director for an organization called PeoplesHub. But where they link is that PeoplesHub got created first out of Sarah Van Gelder's brain after she went through and did a tour of the U.S. Sarah Van Gelder, who started Yes Magazine. And so out of Yes Magazine, there's so many stories around what change looks like in the U.S., around economics and where we had to go in terms of the environment. When I started working at Highlander, which was in 2007, which was 11 years ago, I came doing youth organizing work. And then quickly, because of before my work around environmental justice and environment and climate, now we call climate justice, and then we didn't use that word, and the work around economics and trying to figure out where we were going, we started creating curricula called Mapping Our Futures, which is now what it's called. We're really trying to figure out how people can understand the linkages between the environment and the economy, especially someone's wants to know more about Appalachia. I can talk about that all day, where the conversation that there's been a huge fight around economy versus environment. And we were like, the things aren't like in battle. They're not a football field. And like, we actually have to shift and figure out how we meet our economic needs while at the same time preserving and like restoring our earth, right? All those things have to happen at the same time. And for us to shift the conversation, and we were like, we need stories of what people are doing all around the world. We can't just look at the US. One, the US doesn't have the best models. Two, it was really important for us with all the migration happening. And I was doing youth organizing work. So all of my young people who are coming from all over the world needed to see beauty from their home countries, right? They didn't just need to see what was happening in Europe. They didn't just need to see what was happening in the US. They needed to be able to go wherever I come from, there are beautiful things happening. And our traditional ways of living aren't the problem. The problem is what colonialism and capitalism have done to like craft a place where profit mattered more than people, right? And where profit mattered more than protecting and conserving our environment. And that the ways in which we live together need to move as symbiotic things and not separate from each other. And so Beautiful Solutions really came out of going, what does it mean to share stories? So people don't just say Mondragon in Spain, or I want a bike shop, or I want a random like coffee shop in a place that where people don't go to coffee shops nor ride bikes. Like, so what are actual solutions to meet our material needs and to think about reproductive needs and productive, right? So how do we think about the care economy as well as like making the glasses on my face, right? So how do all those things fit? And how do we look at stories from a hyper-local neighborhood level all the way to a global around every sector, right? So we look at manufacturing, health, land, food, water, and understanding that all of them are interlinked, right? And so I was just in Madison, Wisconsin, doing workshops around Beautiful Solutions with university people and community folks around thinking around like, what does that mean to actually think through if we're going to, in the commons and the commoning. So if we're going to create like an intersection, right, of the commons and commoning, participatory governance, social solidarity economy, and reparations restoration, how do we make all those things happen, right? Because you can't just say we want the commons and the commoning in a place that hasn't, where reparations and restoration haven't occurred. Because the commons are only for certain people, because we all can't participate, right? You can't just say we want to build a social solidarity economy. And so if people haven't heard that term, it's what we are using instead of alternative, right? Because alternative assumes that they never existed. So the social solidarity economy are things from credit unions done right, to big co-ops, to land trusts, to model forest networks. The list is long, but ways that people are tying in participatory governance, putting people in our earth over profits, and like ownership and control being collective. So co-housing, there's lots of co-housing. There's so much actually in the Pacific Northwest that fits, and wherever people come from. And we can talk around reparation restoration later if you want. But, and there are many different ideas around what that looks like. But what does it mean to actually give back to? What does it mean to restore? Not to the way it used to be, because that's not possible. And more than acknowledgement of wrongs, but actually do what people that have been impacted say needs to happen for their language, culture, ways of life, health, not individual, but community, to actually be thriving and sustainable. And so thinking around how all those things together fit, what does it mean for us to make it? And so that's what Beautiful Solutions is about. PeoplesHub is around training groups to be strong and to really actually fight for those things that are necessary. And so I feel like I just talked a lot. But I'm also happy to answer any more specific questions people have or other things that I hope I answered the question you asked.
Boy, that was a lot, Elandria. And I'm thinking it's going to be helpful to people to hear, you strung a bunch of examples of the kind of beautiful solution that's showing up in different places. Could you pick one or two from different regions to help people imagine it or hear it and help them understand what you're talking about?
Yeah, different regions of the country, different regions of the world. Which one do you want?
I would say probably beginning with the United States, but we need to hear about the rest of the world as well.
Yeah, so let's see. What are some good ones? So let's go to Maine. So there's a restorative ocean farming happening in Maine. Started by this guy, Bryn, and now it's actually they're supporting people globally, where they are going, how in like a 1 acre area in an ocean can we reproduce and produce and not have to use any more fresh water, right? And it's layered, right? So what is like means to have kelp, mussels, oysters, a fish. Like, what does it mean to have all these things happening at the same time in a regenerative way? And that all of the ways that traditional farming are like, especially like fresh factory farming in terms of seafood is disgusting, right? And it's super bad for you, and there's super consequences, and it's really bad for the earth. But this is not, right? So this is like, how do we regeneratively, using permaculture practices, actually do farming in the ocean? And so they're actually growing food and animals like in the ocean. And so that's like an example that people can look up. All you have to do is look at regenerative ocean farming, and it's really powerful. And it's a huge amount of food. Yes.
Who controls it? Where did it begin?
Yeah, so it started in Maine, out the coast of Maine. It's a cooperative. And so farmers all join the co-op. And one of the beautiful things is they are guaranteed for 5 years, 80% of their crops are paid for are bought by the co-op, and which allows them to succeed, because it takes 5 years for you to become sustainable, and they do it 3 times the market value, right? And so 3 times the market value, the larger co-op will buy your stuff and will sell it in market. So they've got brands, and they've actually got relationships with other cooperatives that sell seafood, that sell produce, that sell different things that are grown. And so farmers all pitch in together, and that's who owns it.
Beautiful. Thank you. Is there another solution that you'd like to share?
There's so many. I'm like, what are the things to talk about? So one that I'll say in a completely different sector that you would think doesn't have anything to do with the environment, but I think everything does, is Berea College in Kentucky, one of my favorite places on earth. So Berea College is the only school in the United States that is still free to attend. They support first-generation college students that are from Appalachia. And so they're either first-gen or low-income, and so no one has to pay. Everyone does have to do work studies, so you do one internship with a social justice organization, and you do another internship just in whatever area you're doing your studies in, and everybody does jobs on campus. And so it's set up, and in the same way it was set up, Berea College got started during right when in the middle of slavery. It was started as a school for free Black people that were slaves and Appalachian poor white folks, and now is also open to international students that are from countries that don't have a lot of resources, and also first-generation college students. And so it's an amazing example, and it's the only school of its kind that has a completely social justice mission and has 100% graduation rate. And so students come out with 0 debt and 2 powerful internships, and they're like, the rate of success is incredible. And Bell Hooks right now is actually at the scholar in residence at Berea College, and her papers are all there, and that's where she's decided to be because she believes in the place so much. And so imagine what it means for first-generation college students to like actually have Bell Hooks as your like English teacher, right? Like that's kind of an amazing thing. And so they have people that come through. So that's a good example out of Appalachia. Oh God, there's so many more. Like what else to talk about? I'm like, what else? I'm curious what else do people normally interested in, and so that I can give examples.
One of the things that I work directly with congregations all over the country and on different continents, and our experience as Unitarian Universalist congregations has tended to be that we do our justice work as pretty siloed. You know, you either work on racism or you work on poverty, or you work on environment. But we also have tended, not everyone and not every congregation, but we have tended to have a style of doing our work, or a culture of being philanthropists. And so many of our congregations, to do the work really as collaborators, we're starting from ground zero, trying to figure out how do we enter this without controlling it, and across these barriers that we haven't really found a way to cross yet. Do you have anything for us to, I'm sure you have lots of ways that you could encourage us to be thinking differently, but it's really about decolonizing our thinking.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering what kind of stories or questions you would have for us that you would really encourage us to be thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple
You're breaking up a bit,
One, you hear me?
You're breaking up a little bit. So if you would start that statement over again, that would be great.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, much better.
Okay, so UUs like to fight more than they...
Remember to go slow.
Yeah, so UUs like to fight more than they like to build. So we are really good at putting on there are interesting yellow shirts and going out and marching, but not really that great at going, how do we leverage our resources? So here's examples, right? So the largest co-op in the country, housing co-op in the country, was started by Immaculate Food and Clothing and some congregations. So at one point in time, churches actually started housing co-ops. At one point in time, churches are who started a lot of organizations. At one point in time, churches were actually leading the way in terms of starting co-ops, whether it was food co-ops or housing co-ops or credit unions, or a lot of the things that we think about that exist, a lot of them trace back to unions and churches. That is not what we're doing today. So we're not going, how do we solve the problem long term? We'll think about a policy change, which, as we know right now, nothing is long term. That is a policy change in this country. We'll think about like organizing, but we don't think about organizing for creation. And I think that's the biggest shift that has to happen, because a lot of our folks have leverage. We have leverage in terms of not just economic resources, but knowledge resources, the knowledge commons. We have leverage in terms of people we know. We have leverage in terms of abilities to travel. And so there are things that people see and experience and know that really could translate to, like, what would it mean to help craft the future we want to build, right? So while it is true, it is hard to put solar panels in places. Right now we're stuck. So one conversation we were having where in Appalachia, where I'm at, mostly in the deep south, is what does it mean that we have no solar panel? We have very little solar panel cooperatives, right? So if you go buy solar panels, you're still buying them from a pretty horrific source. They're not owned by community. So what would it mean to actually do that, right? So like, we know that we're going to have to shift how energy is done. How in the shifting of energy can we create cooperatives and community-owned resources for energy development, right? What can our congregations do to say, how do we partner with local folks to have things for the long haul? Because part of the, or like, even if it's like, so we're talking about intersection, someone's here for the UU Justice for the Middle East, let's talk Palestine. That's one of my favorite things to talk about. Like, we're literally in the midst of an apartheid system still, where when I was in Palestine, it is hard for people to get water access. It is a serious need. Water is major. So Cape Town's about to run out of water in like 6 months. Palestinians don't have water access. What is our conversation around water privatization? What is happening with water? Beyond just, it's something we need to fight for, what are we going to do to help in that process? So there's like investment things that I feel like we need to talk about that are beyond the policy shifts, that are practice shifts. And I think one thing we have to do, which is why the reparations restoration conversation is necessary, is that we can't create the world we want without rectifying and remediating some of the problems that are in place, right? So we can't just say we're going to have a space where we're all here in the commons. Like, here's an example. So like, when my mom and dad were growing up, they grew up in the South, right? In the Jim Crow era, but they're 74. And so they couldn't go to any public beach, right? So the commons was the beach. Black people couldn't go to the commons, that was the beach. Black individuals had to buy beaches so that Black people could go to them, right? So when we talk about the commons, it's very white and very strange, because most people of color can't actively engage in the commons because the state is against them. So how do we change our conversation about the commons so that actively people who are not considered people by the state, who have actually been in conflict with the state for their entire existence, are able to actually experience and be in the commons? Does that make sense? So there are ways that we have to enter and engage in the conversation that changes some fundamental dynamics and actually allows for a reframe of how we see things moving. And at the same time go, yes, how do we show up, right? How do we show up for immigrant and refugees? How do we show up around climate? How do we show up for all these things? And how do we understand how they link? And so so here's an example that I'll just say, and then I'll stop. and let you ask the next question. And so one of so I ended up interviewing some credit unions that were in Siberia. They're indigenous peoples of Siberia. And it's Siberia. I was like, wow, it's very cold there. And so they were like, so the credit union is the source of how community is coming together, which seems very odd for how our credit union movement moves in the United States. But their credit unions are what helps build wells. Their credit unions build schools. Their credit unions build houses. And so they use the credit union as a mechanism to build the homes they need, the schools they need, all of the things they need to survive in community. And so those are the most powerful examples of solidarity economy enterprises that are happening in the world, that are happening in the US, Canada, all over, are ones that are really going, how do we try to meet multiple needs in community, not just one, right? So even the financing solutions aren't financing solutions at all. That's the primary mechanism. But the other ones are like, how does it meeting every other need that we have? And so I think that's one thing for us as Unitarian Universalists is to be like, how do our churches like actively take a role in creating a different world, and it's in practical ways, and imagine and actually help people imagine what's possible and how we can participate in that.
But I think I hear what you're saying, Elandria, is that we shouldn't just go decide that for another community. We've got to be in relationship and in conversation.
Yeah, we do. And I think part of it is like, it's complicated, right? Because I'm a Unitarian Universalist, but I come from a community that's directly impacted by things that are happening where I live. And so I think also it's a both and. It's us like not assuming that all Unitarian Universalists are upper middle class white people.
Yep.
Which is the normal assumption, which means that we have to be in relationship. I'm like, I'm already in relationship. This is what I do every day. And so it's us going inside of our midst. We have a lot of diversity and we have a lot of experiences. And so if we can actually listen to Unitarian Universalists, all of them, we might actually get somewhere, right? And so one of the things that we do that's wrong is that so many young folks that I know that are UU came up, grew up UU, and because of it are like super incredible organizers. And there are people that have been doing the work since they were kids because our parents raised us to do it. Our churches raised us to do it. But then we don't get to do organizing within our own faith. And we're not brought in as resources within our own faith. So some of the most amazing organizers I know in the immigrant rights movement, climate movement, immigrant rights movement, youth organizing, like the list goes on, are really incredible Unitarian Universalists that don't have home. But like if people could come back as social justice leaders and people who were doing amazing work, it's like when I was in Palestine, I ran into 3 UUs that I met when they were like 15, and I was leading stuff at General Assembly. Who knew I would meet them again in Palestine? Like that's not normal. At least in my life, that wasn't normal. And so I think like how we can see each other as resources, and yes, how we work in community, following the leadership of people who are directly impacted, but holding that some of us that are within our faith are also those directly impacted people, right? And the fact that all of us are impacted in some ways. But I think that's the key, is how do we see ourselves as resources inside, and say how do we relate outside, but knowing that those things aren't always completely separated.
Thank you. There are so many directions this could go in, but Benjamin just came on board and Allie's here. There are a number of young adults in this conversation who I'm wondering if we can make space for, how do you feel, Elandria, about inviting Allie and Benjamin to chime in on that, in part because I'm one of the baby boomers who is also having the same difficulty on some level as people in the Great Generation who are saying, but how do I have a conversation with someone in my congregation who doesn't have the resources I have? I just had this conversation with a Green Sanctuary team where they wanted to work with Habitat for Humanity. And I said, well, find people who are living in houses by Habitat. And they said, well, we have some in our congregation. I said, can you imagine having that conversation with them? And they said, we don't know how. So I'm going to stop there and ask you, Elandria, Benjamin, and Ali, and any other young adults who are on this phone conversation and this web conversation to chime in for a bit with each other, and then maybe we'll take the conversation another step. It's about 8 o'clock now. I think we have a good 20 minutes to a half an hour for this open conversation, and then our group of 24 up in Portland, Oregon will want to be on your own in the conversation, and we may want to break out into small groups. But Elandria, how does that sound as a process?
That's fine to me.
Benjamin, would you unmute yourself? It's good to see you, by the way.
That's good to be here. Thank you.
Great. And Ali, you're right there.
Hi, I'm with a lot of beautiful people, and we are together at the First Unitarian Church in Portland, Oregon. Yeah, so good to be here.
So the offering I just made was based on, it's a response or inviting a continuation of what Elandria was saying about being in conversation with the Unitarian Universalists in our midst, many of whom no longer have a congregation because our congregations weren't able to be responsive to the leadership gift that you have brought. And so, Kathleen, I don't know if that includes you as well, Kathleen McGregor, but those of you who have experienced that, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to say a few words to this group to help us understand it more deeply.
Hello.
Benjamin is here.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Sally, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm trying to get the video. There we go. So I think Elandria can relate to this too, that the youth culture in Unitarian Universalism and the leadership empowerment that happened for me as a youth and for so many other youth is really powerful and different often from how our congregations and our association function. So I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the youth programs, the youth empowerment of UU churches and as a whole. And I think that goes for a lot of folks, you know, and so that comes to mind. I'd love, Elandria has a lot of experience with that too, so I'd love to hear what Elandria has to say about it. And the other thing that really rose up for me as we were talking about this is there's a 10-year-old named Levi who is a Unitarian Universalist who is suing the state of Florida and suing the United States government for not doing enough about climate change. And he is a UU. He is like part of our church community. And this little boy is like 10 years old and already doing this really, really powerful work to hold the governments accountable to our children's future. So I think that's something that the UU Ministry for Earth called on our whole denomination to recognize in partnership with the United Church of Christ through this campaign called Justice for Each Generation, looking at how our second principle of justice and equity also is not for the people alive right now. It's in a way that spans generations, and we have an obligation to this earth and to each other across time. So that's what's on my heart and on my mind from what Elandria just said.
Benjamin, how about you?
I was someone who suffered from a shove instead of a bridge, and I was so it was very important to me that that's something that UU Young Adults for Climate Justice has a really good practice for addressing and making sure we have a
Benjamin, I'm not sure I understood what you just said. You benefited from a shove rather than a bridge?
Oh, no, I suffered. I was before the idea of bridging was widespread, and I was definitely someone who had the shove. And I know while I was on the front edge of that, I know that's still a thing that happens. And I think that's one of the ways we'd set up these relationships and they're yanked away, and that not only do you have that in the model of the youth leadership, but you also have it in the assumptions about how people are going to live their life. Like I was flat out told, and I know I've talked to other young adults about this, we assume you're going to go away to college and you'll just be gone for a while and then you'll come back sometime. And that's completely just writing off a group of people and then assuming a lot about how they're going to live their lives.
Right.
And that assumption underlies exactly the same things that make that congregation unable to speak to those people, because that they invalidate the assumption that they operate under all the time, and that's a conflict that people don't like to face. And so I think that's the other part of this, is people are aware when they're frankly being hypocrites, and that makes it awkward to talk about. And that's the other side of the wanting to be perfect, is that when you realize you haven't been perfect, you're paralyzed and don't want to face it. And that would be my advice then, is to find those incongruities and face them, and then try to have frank conversations, even if it's only with a few people, because at least you've started the ball going that then makes a place where you can be receptive to those who've been unchurched, like Elandria is talking about.
And for all of you to know, Benjamin agreed to do a really beautiful video on how white people can approach becoming reliable allies or collaborators to find our way awkwardly into being a presence that's reliable. And if you want to see it, I would recommend it. It's a video on the Green Sanctuary webpage. So I'm going to now, I see someone else just arrived. I would like to.
I'm sorry, I'm waving at Mel Hoover because I see his face.
Yeah.
And I saw Joseph, and so my little two co-patriots, and there may be others in the world. Sorry, I just had a moment where I was like, oh!
Elandria, Mel has a question for you.
Okay.
Elandria.
Hello, Uncle.
Here you are, and we're learning from your life experiences and lessons. How did you, as a Black UU in a predominantly white system, become who you are?
Why are you doing this to me, Mel Hoover?
Because I love you. Yay! Hey, Elandria, it's Chris Long.
Hello, Chris Long. Oh my goodness. Eric David Carlson says hello to and Miles. Oh my goodness. So, that is a hard, okay. So I'll say one, I have amazing parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and great aunts and uncles who were so rooted and were so clear around what it meant to be a Williams and what it meant to be a Childs and what it meant to like grow up, to love you. And they were like rock solid. Like they were like, we love us. We love where we come from. Like there was never complications around identity for me. Like I was very clear. I come from people who started NAACP chapters. I came from people who survived lynchings. I came from people who like started their own Black towns and were clear. And actually what's funny is like I have a granddaddy, all my family were organic, but they didn't know what that meant. And so they were like, so that was like, you're organic. He's like, what the hell is organic? I don't know what that means, right? They're like, we don't read and write. What's an organic, right? But that's how they farmed. And so like I learned how to farm from them. And I remember like being 15 and being like, I want to become a vegetarian. And like folk were like, okay. Because I was like, how animals are treated are really horrific in farms. But I learned that at Tuskegee, right? Tuskegee University, which is a historically Black college in Alabama, had like half of a group of Black kids all become vegetarians at 15 years old. And they were like, okay, let's support that in the midst of an agricultural school. And so I think what it meant is that by the time I got to be a Unitarian in the 3rd, 4th grade, which was really early, it meant that like we had foundation. And then when I was there, my church, I'm a member of Tennessee Valley Unitarian Universalist Church. I love my church. I love my church. I love my ministry, who is my DRE. I love my ministers because they were like, we will do Journey Toward Wholeness. We will have a transformation team. We will do the anti-racism and anti-classism work that is necessary because we also understand, and it was all intersectional, right? So the same people who were red diaper babies, so if people don't know red diaper babies, it means their parents are communists, right? And in the midst of the Red Scare, who were underground, they like trained us up around how does Marxism link up with what it means to be against nuclear weapons, because Oak Ridge was next door, linked with like we must be anti-racist organizers, mixed with we have to do with class and be labor organizers. And
You're breaking up a little bit, Elandria.
Am I too fast?
You're breaking up a little.
I know. You want me to cut the video off?
You're good.
No, keep on going, but just know that you're breaking up a little bit, so maybe needing to slow down a bit.
Okay.
But the more exciting it gets, we want to hear it all.
So, well, the thing I just said was that what it meant to be Marxist, what it meant, or like leftist, what it meant to be against nuclear weapons, what it meant to be like fighting for the earth, what it meant to be, all those things was linked, right? And that the work around Journey to Wholeness, I mean, I met Mel when I was like 14 or 15, and like actually working with him, Joseph Santos Lyons, whose picture is over there, who I met coming to General Assembly and being like, what is going on with these random white young people? And they were like, him and Danielle Glad are like, and Kristen Harper, let's come into a caucus. And I was like, okay. And so I think that most of it is about relationships, to be honest. It's about being rooted in Unitarian Universalist faith, not allowing anyone to take it from me because I grew up with it and no one has like authority on it. Having people that I can call uncle and aunt who are just as close to me as the biological ones, and like knowing that this is mine because I am rooted with like tentacles, right? And then having a church home that I don't have baggage from. Like I still go on Sunday mornings, right? Like I go to church on Sunday mornings, and having a minister who said to me in the midst, because y'all lost 20 young people in 1 year to murders and police brutality and violence. 20 in 1 year. And that same year, the water in West Virginia was polluted and we were having to bring in water because there was no water to drink. And that same year, like I could just keep going down, mountains were just being blown up, like everything in the universe. And there were like massive deportations in that same year. And it was like, I was like depressed and crying all the time. And my minister, Chris Bice, came and said, Elandria, what do you need for this church for you to stay here? What do you need from me? And I was like, I need a minister and a preacher. Like I need a preacher. I don't need like an intellectual. I need a preacher who can like get brilliant, but be a brilliant preacher, right? And to offer us hope and where we got to go. And so he was like, I'm going to be here for Elandria. And like, it doesn't matter if y'all want a quiet service. The young people need a loud one. And it doesn't matter if y'all want to argue about this random thing over here. These young people and older people in the struggle need this. And so that's what we're going to be here to do. And so I have been able to stay and be transformed and held by both my like local church home, which I think really does matter, and my collective church home, which is all over the country, which includes people in that room. And I will say, Allie, love you. Like having all of the young people that I grew up with and ones after me, like Alyssa Goss, who does work with you, Justice for the Middle East, like seeing them move, and like Alice Mant, who I was just in Madison, Wisconsin, who's now our DRE, like watching the ones that were 14 and 15 and 16 and 17 now be in their 20s and 30s, and her leadership within our faith keeps me here, right? Like watching the generations move is what keeps me rooted in our faith. And I love y'all, like, because you're mine, even when I get annoyed.
Elandria, I wanted to ask about like transformation. One thing that's coming up to me right now is like the Hemes principle of being transformed, willingness to be transformed in your work for justice. And I know the UUA is like at this point of, okay, we need to transform. And so you are in a really key role in that. And I wanted to ask you to speak to us about the Unitarian Universalism in its collective way in which you're one of the chief governance officers. How are we in the midst of transformation, and how do we need to be willing to transform in this moment?
Bravo.
You asked
Bravo.
about the 8th principle factors into it.
And Paula Cole-Jones is in the room.
Hi, Mama Paula.
And Paula wants to come up to the video and just add a addendum to that question.
Hi, Elandria, how are you?
Hello. I love you.
Come
You
up,
are
come up.
brilliant. So I wanted you to include something about the 8th principle and your response there.
That was coming anyway.
Okay, people always ask me about GA, and so you have a chance now to tell us directly.
Wonderful. So I told this to Mama Paula a while ago, right after General Assembly. And so here we go. I don't believe we need to do Band-Aid changes. I don't believe it's time for tag-ons. I think tag-ons isn't transformation. Tag-ons is how you make something transactional and not transformational. Like I said, I don't know why it has to be 8 and can't be number 1. Like I literally don't get it. And I think like the question is, I don't think it's time for the 8th principle. I think it's time to reimagine who we want to be and where we want to be at this time, right? Because just adding the 8th principle as a principle isn't enough, because it means it's not integrated into every aspect of how we are living our faith out. So yes, it needs to be a principle, and right, it needs to be rooted in every way we move. Here, like multiple other ones, we have a General Assembly in which every congregation doesn't feel like they're supposed to be there. What does it mean that we have a faith movement in which every fellowship and congregation doesn't even believe they need to be in the room? How do you make participatory decisions if everyone's not there? Like, that's ridiculous. So like the way we even think about decision making has to shift. And so the construct this year, and I hope everybody is so ready, because it is going to make everybody do some work, is where do we need to be for the world we're in now? Not the one we were in 50 years ago, and not the one that we're in, but where we want to be. Like, so for our grandkids, I'm not having any, but my nephew's grandkids, if he has them, like, where are we trying to be for them, right? So what are our bylaws need to look like for them? Which means a lot of them just need to go away, because a lot of our structures are set in debate and arguing. They're not actually for collaboration and transformation. They're for two faiths that were arguing with each other. And so there are things in there to like say, oh, you can't do that. Oh, you can't do that. So it's about limits and not about possibility, right? So the question is, if our goal is to create possibility and not limits, not that power doesn't mean limited, but like, goodness gracious, like there's also not possibility creation. So the question is, how are our bylaws? How are our practices? How does the way that we move as people, how does the way that we move in understanding how our congregations relate to the greater? And the other part is, what does it mean to do covenanted communities? Church is changing. Faith is changing. So I'm like, I don't know why drum and blue and trust and the You Just Ministering of the Earth can't be covenanted communities. Like what says that you have to be at a brick and mortar church to be covenanted? That's not real. We have way more covenanted communities. And so the question is, how do we reimagine where we want to be? I don't have all the answers, right? I think part of the question is for the elders in the room, the middle people, the young people, the 8-year-olds. Like, what do we all see as possibilities? How do we make sure that there's people who have not felt like their needs are being met in our association are like at some of the center of this? And not just people who feel like they've had everything they've needed for generations, right? How do we make sure that all of our voices are in the space? How do we make sure the 8th principle isn't just a tack on, but is actually embedded and rooted in everything? Because that's my biggest fear about doing just a bylaw change and adding a principle, is that it's like people go, oh, look, we did it. Yay. Kind of like we have a black president. Woo, woo, we're done. And now look where we're at. We're in the midst of foolishness. And so like, we can't just add the principle. We need to figure out, how do we unroot and go, what does that mean? Because so many religious professionals of color, lay professionals of color, trans and poly religious educators are like in dire suffering. Like, it is not pretty. Like, we're at a time in which we are actually, this sounds so intense to say, we were in a different place 20 years ago. We were doing more anti-racism work in 1999 as a whole in our faith than we are doing in 2018. That is deep, y'all. Like, we were moving and then we stopped. So I also believe that we have to unroot what keeps us getting stuck. What keeps us, it's like radical reconstruction, right? Radical reconstruction hit and there was the backlash. Civil rights movement hit, there was the backlash. We had some movement, there was a backlash. We're in a backlash time right now. So what does it mean for us to make shifts? How do we understand our own Unitarian Universalist backlash so that we are prepared, so that we have either convinced enough people to move, or we have enough of a tipping point where we will make it anyway, so that when the backlash comes, we are ready. Because it will come. Like, that's just the way it works. Unless people all feel bought in, but everybody's not going to feel all the way bought in. So how do enough people feel bought in and are ready to go, that when the backlash hits, we will be ready, we can withstand it. I hope that makes sense. Because I think, like, it's really important for that to be understood, because otherwise we will have all kinds of great programs. We'll make all kinds of changes. All these things will happen. And then in 30 years, we're going to look and go, what? Like, what just happened? And to recognize that we're in a really interesting time where all four people that are like co-moderators, president, and soon to, and Carrie's title, which is like COO, soon to be like executive vice president, whatever that title will be. Like, we're all born and raised, we're all raised up UUs. And we're all under 45. So it's a really particular time right now. And so what does that mean? That we're all four really rooted in what it means to be Unitarian Universalist in a really like strong way. And so for us, we've decided to not fight. So I'll give some examples, right? Everybody that's in a board meeting participates. We don't have any more, you're over there, we're over here. We're all a part of having our faith. There's no observers. We don't have observers to the faith. We're all in it. Let's go, right? Like, we need everyone's like engagement. So you'll see a difference at General Assembly. It's not going to just be me and Barb up at the mic. Every board member will have work to do, right? Because like, how do we actually collectivize where we have to go? And the next year, we're going to call every congregation and bother all kinds of people, because reimagining what the bylaws look like and where we're going to go is going to take all of us. It's going to take all the stakeholder groups, all the people engaged, all the folks, not just the ones that are somewhat always there, but a lot of people who never feel they're asked. And then the last thing I guess I'll say is that I think it's like, here's the other one. There's a lot of people, like the Commission on Institutional Change, which has done incredible work. One of the things they talked about were the ways the administration and board could not work together. And that inability to work together meant a lot of things did not happen like they were supposed to. And so one thing that for us is really important is that we will talk, we will slog it through. We're going to use modified consensus and not Robert's Rules of Order. And we're going to figure out how we make decisions that we can all move with, right? And how to show dissenting view. Because one thing that we're like is there's dissent. And it's not fair to not show dissent. There have been many times in the last year and a half where I wish a dissenting opinion could have been out there. And so we're like, let's do. Like, yes, we can all go along with the decision, but like the dissenting vote needs to be shared. And of course, if it's a block, it's not moving. But at least if there's an abstention, why? So we can go back and go, maybe we should have thought of it. So maybe we can look back at that and go, oops, we missed it. Mm-hmm. We all missed the memo. We weren't paying attention. I hope that answered the question. If not, you can always ask me to tell something else.
Right. One more thing. What should we expect at General Assembly regarding this?
Oh, goodness. So we're going to have some bylaw changes. You'll see time. We're going to discuss in the hall. And one of the general sessions time is actually for discussion the whole time. Part of the time is for discussion. We're going to lay out like a plan for what's going to happen over the next year. There'll be some simultaneous processes. So something that was in motion already, but has also been brought forth by Lena Gardner with Blue, is to actually have a group that is actually moving alongside this process, that is mostly made up of people that have been directly impacted by some of these things, and some people that are ready to go, like, what does radical shift look like? To go, how do we make sure, working with the Commission on Institutional Change, how do we make sure that we are moving to understand what's happening to people of color, trans people, poly folks within our faith, people with disabilities? How does that make sure that that's moving alongside what is going on with the bylaws changes and everybody else, so that we're not losing out on like the really importance and centrality of people that have been directly impacted by a lot of the things that are happening, having voice, and not just having like a small voice, but actually having like an equal voice, and maybe more equal, right? So that whatever we create is actually righteous. So that's, and so next year, General Assembly in Spokane will look much more like a general conference than a regular General Assembly, which means that we're going to also discuss what does this all mean for us theologically, because we don't sometimes have good theological conversations around some of this, and what does that mean for us theology wise. And so like we'll do some major shifting and conversations and voting, but also like theologically underpinning, what does this mean? What do these shifts mean for us?
Elandria, we have another question here from Pat Collier.
Hey, Elandria.
Oh my goodness.
How are you, my friend?
Hello, I haven't seen you in forever.
It's been a long time. It sure has. So
Not everyone knows who you are, Pat. Would you say hello and introduce yourself?
I'm Pat Collier. I'm a Unitarian, been one for a long time. I met Elandria when she was very young, but very smart. So I am so appreciating you, Elandria, and the work that you do. And in the People of Color Caucus here, we've been talking about how we effectively connect the idea of environmental justice and anti-racism. And so that it's not just an either or, but that they are linked and that we do our work from that concept. And I was just wondering what you thought or what your ideas were about that.
Yeah, I mean, well, one, you can't, they're not unlinked. I mean, the environmental justice movement came out of people of color and anti-racism organizing. So like, if you're doing environmental justice work that isn't anti-racist at its core, then you're not doing environmental justice work. That'd be one. That's like the baseline. I mean, you're doing something else. And so like, I mean, it makes me think about, so I was just in, where was I? Woo, buddy. I was in Barcelona. And a lady who's with Action Ecologica, that's, I'm starting to fly. So I was, yes, ma'am.
Could you
I'm not even talking now. So, I was just in Barcelona, showing a case, talking about case studies around what was happening in Detroit, Jackson, and Birmingham, right, around cooperative economies, where we're going to go and what's happening to the environment and the urban commons. And a lady from Ecuador with Action Ecologica was like, it reminds me, the environmental justice movement, which came out of the 90s in the United States with Black, Latino, and Native people. It's like, yeah, I was like, mm-hmm. And so I think people, one, forget where it came from. Yeah. Two, and so because people forget where it came from, and some Appalachian people, but because people forget where it came from, it's easy to use the word without understanding the root, right? It came out of people fighting toxic waste dumping. It came out of people fighting incinerators. It came out of organizing, like hardcore organizing for the fact that our communities were only used as extraction and dumping, right? Extraction and dumping. And so if the solutions are not about both extraction and dumping, and we're not organizing for both extraction and dumping, then we're not doing environmental justice work, because it's not dealing with the fact of who's being dumped on and who's being extracted, right? We're doing something that's cute. So like, I remember when I was like a kid and we like bought rainforests, which was like really cool as a third grader, but like as a 38, about to be 39-year-old, that clearly isn't enough, because we weren't dealing with like the problems, like the root. And so I think part of the thing for UUs is like, how to, one, Do we, and like I said earlier, how do we sue who's in our midst? 2, how do we get completely linked up with groups led by people of color directly impacted by the extraction and dumping, and white people, right? Because there's some white people who are directly impacted by the toxins and the dumping and the extraction, especially like where me and Mel live, right? So like, but those folks don't feel home at UU spaces either. So like, how do we like really understand what that looks like? And how do we like go, well, so what is our relationship there? And what does that mean for us to fight on all levels and not just what's easy, right? So it means we have to do the hard fights. We have to be in community with people. We have to eat what they eat. So it means sometimes I can't be a vegan. Like we have to like literally like be at home. So like I go to hollers. We got to get in the holler and like sit down and get in like the hood, get in all the places and be. And listen in and just follow. And I think like if we learned how to follow more, we would make a huge, big difference. Because a lot of people meet me, they come to General Assembly because they're leading a workshop and they're like, Elandria, why are you here? They're like, are you leading a workshop? And I'm like, no, I'm a UU. And they're like, huh? Really? Huh? How did that happen? They get very confused. Right? They're like really confused. But they're confused because they're like, but you don't, but you're, and because so often like what people say to me is, you know, the UUs, they show up, but they're kind of hard to work with because there are a lot of them show up and they talk a lot and they like don't really want to listen and they kind of say they want to follow, but they use a lot of words we don't understand. And so as you'll notice, I don't use big words when I talk because I don't think it's necessary. And so I think it's really important to go, how do we talk the language of the people we're working with? How do we take leadership from, if we're in that group, how do we like actually take leadership within our own churches? And like, how do we understand the extraction and the dumping and realize we must do work around both and not be afraid to be a radical? I think that's the last thing I'll say is to not be afraid of being a radical and a revolutionary. Like we're at a time when people need to, like we are at a what side are you on Florence Reef's moment. Where we have to be able to be like, are we radical revolutionaries wanting transformation? Are we people that just think that the earth should be a nice, happy place? Like we're at that moment. And because we're at that moment, we got to be ready to go and ready to be like, it's time to go all the way, no matter the cost. And that we're ready to stand with community, how they see fit and moving in the direction they want to go. And we're ready to go alongside because we believe in it and believe in them. And i.e., I believe in and us believe in ourselves. Because that's what it means, is believing in ourselves.
Thank you so much for what you do.
Elandria, is there anyone you want to call on to be in this conversation who's in this room? You brought up the name Joseph Santos Lyons, who's in the room. We've heard just a wee bit from some of the other people of color leaders who are over in Portland. Is there someone else you want to invite into the conversation that we should hear from?
I can't answer that question because I don't know who's all on the phone and what people do. What I would say, if there's somebody that's on the phone or that's in the room that feels like they have something they want to share or a question they've got or comment around what I said, I would love to hear it. Let's see. So Reverend Earl Coton just said, I'd like to raise a question. Gary Peasant says, forget safety, live where you fear to live, be notorious, by J. Rumi. Amen. So Earl, is there something you would like to say?
Go ahead, Earl.
Yes. Have you connected at all with Green the Church or the efforts that's being made in Richmond, California?
No, because I live in Tennessee, but I would love to hear more.
Okay, we'll have a conversation offline. Green the Church is a Black church response to climate change.
Oh yeah. They're connected in with other stuff. Yeah,
okay.
It's hard to remember. I'm sorry.
They are being led by Reverend Ambrose Carroll, who serves with me on the California Interfaith Power and Light. And I would like to discuss some of the things that you talked about at some point, including a conversation I had a long time ago with Fred Small, who's been doing this stuff for 30 years longer than I have. But it turned out that while he knew everything that was going on in Massachusetts, he didn't know that much about what was going on in California or vice versa. So lets you and I sort of compare notes sometimes, because there is a lot of stuff going on that is very closely connected with what you've been saying. Thank you for Paul.
And I see, so when I worked at Highlander works all around the country and the world. And so there's groups that we work with in Richmond that are pretty badass. There's some amazing groups in Richmond, California. And so I think part of the thing too, right, is to work where you live and to connect with people that don't live there. And so there's a lot of work I've done with the NAACP, like Jackie Patterson, who's just like a ballsy, and some amazing, amazing folks that are like, and so some of the work we do is also around energy efficiency. Like, what does it mean? And so I think, like, you know, I think part of the thing is really been like, and so much of the work is like, what is the blend of crafting where we want to be and fighting what exists, right? So that build, the resist. So we say resist, create, and imagine. Like, we must do the three. And I think for a lot of times we've been in just the resist mode. Well, we've also been in like, what does it mean to like create, right? Because we've got to figure out like where we want to go. And so that's why I've talked about that more. In large part because I feel like most of us do the resist. And so I kind of made a little turn into being like, if we can't craft a different way of operating with the earth, then operating with each other, like literally, it's not going to matter, right? Like it's really not going to matter if we can't figure out how to do production that is not destroying. And if we can't figure out how to do different ways of being where we can actually do participatory governance, because most people have never had democratic governance before. And so like we're helping people think about like, how do you use participatory budgeting to reimagine how you do your budgeting and to actually do externalities in your accounting. And so one thing that, you know, is just real is that we're like, nope, there are ways to show externalities. There are ways to show what the cost of using things in our accounting and our churches. And so like how we do social audits. So if people don't do social audits in your churches, it's a really good thing to do. It shows like your environment, like ways you're being environmental, ways that, and so then you can actually like start measuring for people to see what does it look like? What does transformation look like beyond just having a lead building? Because there's so much. And so like, yeah, I don't know who else is on, like Joseph, you want to say anything? Anybody else that's brilliant that like wants to offer something? There's people who have way more, they've done way more than I have, that's for certain, on this call. And so I want to honor that.
Elandria, for the folks in this room, I think if we can kind of, and Karen, this is also a question for you. We're a lot of people, so like usually at the end of these calls, we do discussion, and we were going to tune out to have an in-person discussion.
Yeah. So
I want to say, does anyone in this room want to ask Elandria a question directly and then kind of prioritize that, and then we'll tune out and discuss with each other after that. So now's your moment if you want to come up to the computer and ask the question. Don't be shy. We have one.
There's a question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jimmy's coming. Jimmy.
Hi, Elandria.
Hey. Hi! Hello, love.
Jimmy, would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Jimmy Betts. I'm not necessarily part of a UU congregation, but we work with awesome people here. I guess the question might be a longer question. Sort of talking about bureaucracy and other things that may keep people from getting involved, taking action that are part of this tradition. What role might direct action, creative process that it is play for people to come together and stay together as a part of it? Pretty general. Yeah.
And so I want people to know something. Jimmy Betts right there. So we're going to just do a little Jimmy love. Because I think it's important. So Jimmy is a person that knows how to move through movement space and goes from place to place to place supporting people, no matter what it is. And so Jimmy love, so Elandria has lots of love for Jimmy Betts because there's some people who do it really badly. Mm-hmm. This is the person that does it really well. And so there's lots to learn if you're in the room and you don't know this person up there, because like what it means to do direct action, if you're not from a place, can be really complicated. And the experiences that some of us have with people doing direct actions in our communities is really pretty bad. What I think is important, though, is that direct actions don't mean so many things. And I think one thing that has happened with the not teaching movement history correctly is that we don't actually lay out the many roles that people can play in making shifts, right? So that everyone can't put their bodies on the line. Some people can't go to jail. They've already been incarcerated. Some people can get deported off of it, right? And so, like, the many ways of understanding that if all you can do is sit in your house and write letters because you can't travel, great. Like, that is a way to entry. So I do believe that, like, we must have thousands of entry points, and that there's not a strategy, there's strategies in making our vision possible. I want to say that before I talk around direct action, because a lot of times when people hear people talk around direct action organizing, it seems like that's the only way to be. And if you're not doing that, you're not radical enough. And I don't believe that. Like, I actually believe you can be I have a disability. I'm a person who has disabilities. And so there are times I can't make it to the rally. So people don't see me on the streets much anymore because I'm like, I can't do that. Like, otherwise someone has to carry me home. And so I think, like, how we each participate is important. But direct actions can be anything from, like, refusing to buy and, like, actually taking your, like, resources away to, like, literally taking over a spot. How I think direct actions help build community is that you're all in. Like, once you have agreed to be in, you are in. And, like, the people you do that action with, you are connected to for the rest of your life. Because either you've been in jail together, or you're hungry together, or, like, you're, like, dirty together. Regardless of how fun it is or not fun, it's relationship building and it's time. And it's something that you had to come to collective agreement on to do. So the process by which you should have decided to do a direct action and which roles people are going to play is really a practice in democracy. I don't normally use the D word because I don't think we've ever seen it, but it's a practice in participatory governance. And so what it means for people to say, I'll take on this role, I'll support you, I'll, like, help raise money for the bail fund, I'll help, like, you're climb the tree, I got your water. You're gonna, like, I was just in Barcelona, right, and some migrants, like, decided to take over a abandoned building and they're gonna shut it down. And so I don't live in Barcelona, but we're like, we can bring breakfast, right? And so we felt like we had some support, even though we were leaving town. So, like, all the ways that people can, like, really support in is crucial. And so it also means that every one of us has a role to play and can really build, and then afterwards can go, we did that together. Like, we made that happen. And I've watched direct actions, like, stop everything from, like, bulldozers coming through to, like, I've participated in direct actions from everywhere from it's the movement for Black Lives, and we're helping young people not get arrested and, like, stopping police arrests, to stopping people being deported, to stopping people, like, tearing up mountains. And so I think, like, all the many forms of direct actions are really necessary. And I think it is real that there's some fear and apprehension sometimes because of what it can mean. And so to me, the other question is how to help people feel like they're in community and that they're not alone, and to, like, help people, like, gradually ease people in. Sometimes you can just throw people in and they're like, all right, I'm ready. But other people actually have to be gradually eased in, and that's okay too.
Elandria, I have a follow-up question to that. I was part of a direct action campaign to stop a pipeline in East Texas.
Yes, you were.
A Baptist church supported our blockade in a really, really powerful way, and it transformed not just our little campaign, but all of our lives. And I see a lot of risk aversion in Unitarian Universalism, and I also see a lot of Unitarian Universalists taking really big risks. And it's the people individually versus the institution. And so I wanted to ask your thoughts on that question of how does Unitarian Universalism support individual UUs taking risks, and also reconcile the fact that there's a lack of that in a way, or a less than there could be and maybe should be on that.
Yeah, I think it's a very complicated thing, partly because of the way our churches are set up so individualistic that like everyone has their own individual needs, wants, and wishes. And so like people's individual needs, wants, and wishes play a role in ways that it just doesn't at a Baptist church. I mean, like, it's just a very different cultural norm around like what it means for us to move. I also think this is going to be really blasphemous. And so just hold it that it's semi-blasphemous, but that I'm you to the core. Is that I also think like, because we have an interesting dynamic with faith and spirit and higher power, it means that it can be very complicated to know that when I'm in the midst of a battle, there is somebody on my side. So like, if you believe that there is God on your side and that whatever you do, God is with you, hell, God is with you. If you don't believe in a higher power and you don't believe the people are with you, then it's a little more complicated. So you got to believe somebody is with you, standing with you, marching with you, and community with you. And so if you're in your little isolated universe that consists of the 0.3 people that you trust and like your immediate family, and you're not connected to nobody else, and it's really like up here and not like in here or like in here, then it is tough. So you have to be rooted in something, whether it's community, whether it's spirit, whether it's like love of people, not love like random, because love as a whole is like, what are you loving? Love of something, like love of a thing, of something, and rooted, that's how you know you're going to be okay. And so that's why I think it is hard for us to get past, because we're too busy trying to figure out, arguing about little bitty things, and we don't trust that the transformation is possible, right? Like we're almost too smart. Like we're almost too much, because we're too good at, like, we do a lot of critique. We're so good at the critique. Oh my God, we're so good. So like we spend a lot of time going, but what about that thing? I don't know about that thing, but I don't know about that thing, but what about that? Oh, right? So like if we can talk for 3 hours about color of a wall and a bathroom toilet, then like what it means for, or like debate. I mean, if people have been a general session, like really, I'll never forget the first one. I was like 16 and they literally argued for 2 hours around a colon or a semicolon. And I was like, does it really matter? Everyone all was looking around like, I mean, can't somebody just fix it? But it was a 2-hour debate. And we don't do that anymore. But like if we can do that as a faith, then like God, like to get to direct action. So I think like what it means for us to let go of the small stuff and to move on to the big stuff, and to be willing to trust each other enough that we will actually be there for each other, really be there for each other. That to me is what it takes, right? It's like trust that we will be there for each other, and that something bigger than you, I don't care if it's community or love or the tree or the ally can knock us all down, but bigger than you, like what?
Yay! We have 15 minutes, Elandria, and I know Allie, you and Mel and Paula and Jimmy, we all had a plan about what you were going to do with this last 15 minutes. That my sense is that we could just continue with this for the next 15 minutes, or do you really need to shift how we're doing things right now?
It's fine. This is fine. I think, are we good?
Awesome.
We're good.
Awesome. Then we're bringing up questions from people's experiences and hearts. What other questions or comments do we have in the group that have not surfaced yet? Or Elandria, if there's something else you want to bring in.
Well, there was one question around how we break from silos.
How do we break our silos?
Yeah, and so I think one thing that I feel like with our churches, and I'll just say this is my opinion, this is Elandria, is that I think like the more we know how. So one thing I just did actually, right, is like help people do a sector diagram of the economy, and like how the commons fits in, reparations, how everything fits. And then we like lay stuff out around like some values and principles around what it takes for us to get to another place. And I think part of the reason we're in our silos is we haven't done a good enough job of helping people make connections. And what I think the actual reason we haven't broken out of our silos, this is going to be really horrible, but here we go, is that a lot of us don't have multiple problems. Right? So if you need a house and you in debt and you hungry and your school you go to sucks, I guarantee you can't just think about education.
Right.
Because you got lots of other things to worry about. All of them are hitting you. And so even if the main work you do is education, it is hitting everything else because you can't not talk about it. Right. I think what happens with Unitarian Universalists is often people have their pet projects that they've worked on for 25 years or their thing that they care about, but it's like divorced from it's divorced from everybody's reality, right? So here's an example. So we're sitting here talking around reparations and the little group of Beautiful Solutions I'm with. And so Eli's from Lebanon, right? So we were having this conversation of what does globalized reparations look like? And what would that mean in Lebanon, which one has an intense caste system and was in civil war. And so we're having this conversation and we're like, oh, did we know that there was caste in Lebanon? I didn't know until I met a Lebanese Druid who explained to me that the way they do their system is that only because they do everything based on proportions and ratios. So that if there's an election, the percentage of Druids that are allowed to get into government are the percentage they are in the population.
Oh.
There's the percentage they've allotted. So there's 2 slots for a Druid in a college. 2. If 2 have gotten in, there are no more in. Whoa. Right? If 2 have gotten into here, there's no more spots. We don't have nothing that looks like that. So we think we're in really bad shape. I promise we're not in that bad shape. So I think part of the thing is because we don't know enough, it is hard to go, how does everything link up? At that point, I went, oh, we got another conversation then. Because we got racial casteism and other stuff, but whoa, that's a whole other thing around quotas. And then we talk about, oh, we need political parties. And then I met somebody who was like, yeah, I'm in Malaysia. But every single party is off race and religion. So can you imagine every religion having their own political party and every race having their own political party? I was like, oh yeah, never mind. That may be a lot too. And so I think and so part of the thing I think with silos in our churches is a lack of awareness around what is happening around us and holding how things are interlocked, right? The other thing that's just honest in the United States, and we're really the only country that doesn't have class struggle. Mm. Every other country has class-based movements. Huh. All movements are class-based. They start from the frame of the class. All cooperatives start from worker. They add other things, but worker is number 1. So since we don't do class struggle in the United States very well, and we definitely don't do it and use them very well, because that means a whole bunch of people, even people of color, would have to actually deal with the fact that they are also upper middle class. We don't talk about class. And so I don't believe that you can do anything not talking about a class-based struggle in a country in which class is central. It's not just race is central. If you can't pay a single bill, so my twin can't pay no bills, that is central to his life. And yes, it has to do with his blackness, but it also has to do with the fact that my great-grandparents and grandparents didn't come from wealth, right? Everything we had to work for. And so I think that is the thing of why we're in silos in this country, is that 1, we don't know enough. 2, we don't have class struggle as a root along with race. So I'm not saying they're separate, but they got to be connected. And then how patriarchy plays a role too. So how those 3 things move together throughout and going, but how do we deal with that underpinning? Because that actually takes more work. And I think really it's a matter of getting people in a room together to go, what do we have to fix? So what we try to do is community mapping. Let's map out how power works. Because once you map out how power works, that's the question. Because when you look at how power works, it's operating on every line. They're not looking at a thing. They're looking at how do we deal with housing? Great, let's gentrify. How do we deal with food? Let's own all of the food sources. We got 5 companies that own every bit of food and pharmacy across the world. So like in the same 5 are actually the same 5 that own the media, that are owning media. And instead of us looking at power as a whole, we are stuck looking at Band-Aid solutions and little bitty pieces of the pie. And partly because it's too hard to see it, but there are ways to like unearth it, but we have to do it. And so if we really did power dynamics and power mapping and power analysis of like where we sit, then we would get a much clearer picture of what we have to fight for. And to really go, now how do we shift that dynamic? And then it's like the conversation shifts in a whole other way, because then you can see where power and control really lie and what they're controlling as a totality. I hope that made sense.
Sure does. Now, according to my clock, we have 5 more minutes on this, and I think we actually oh, there you are, Elandria.
Sorry.
I know, I just thought we lost you and I was not happy. We have 5 minutes, and what I want to say is that it's hard to imagine how to express our gratitude to you for the work you do on behalf of our world and us. So I'm just going to assume there's an overwhelming sense of gratitude coming to you, Elandria, and to also the people of color leaders and young adult leaders who are in this call. And also I want to say that Allie, being one of our brilliant young adults, is helping us figure out how to create a platform called createclimatejustice.net that we're hoping more of us can network together and actually learn from each other and deepen our connectedness. It's not all going to happen through that. It's going to happen through the relationships that we build and do this work together intentionally. And so I'm going to invite everyone on the call to figure out how you want to stay connected to what Elandria is trying to teach us, but also with each other in an interconnected way. So Allie, is there a way that you would like to close this gathering? Because I know we're going to close. And Elandria, if there's another closing that you cherish, I'll offer that to you as well. But then I'll stop our recording, and then we go off onto the next stage of our journeys. And so
before Allie, I'm gonna let you close. If anyone wants to contact me, you can find me online. It's elandria.c.williams@gmail.com or ewilliams@ua.org. You can find my number. Literally, you can Google Elandria and you'll find my phone number. And so I would love to chat with anybody who wants to talk.
Great. Go ahead, Allie.
Elandria, thank you so very much. And I think all of us that are here, thank you so much. We love you. You are such an amazing leader of our faith. And so thank you. And Karen, thank you for mentioning createclimatejustice.net. Just to kind of round out that thought, if you go to createclimatejustice.net, there's a sign up button where you can be notified when it publicly launches. We're still in the beta test and final touches phase, but that's for this community to build together and transform together. So you're invited. I think what I would want to do to close is to sing together. That's my thought. And so I Know This Rose Will Open is a song that I love and that we could sing together. And probably it's copyright, so maybe I'll stop the recording.
That's a good idea.
And
I just unmuted everyone.
Oh, wow. Okay, so the recording's ending. Thank you for tuning into the recording, and we will sing together and say goodnight.